What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Rybrary. I'm your librarian, no talking in the Rybrary. Hope you're all having a good day. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a reading challenge that I'm participating in for the second time this year. That's the Our Fantasy Book Bingo Challenge. The Our Fantasy Book Bingo Challenge is an annual reading challenge hosted by the fantasy subreddit on Reddit. Our Fantasy is a huge community. There's like 4 million members or something like this, and they've been doing this reading challenge every year for like over a decade. I'm not exactly sure how long it's been running, but over a decade. Like I said, I participated last year in this, and it was such a blast. And it's honestly like I had been ramping up already into reading a lot more in the last couple of years, but doing this challenge kind of really kickstarted an interest in reading a lot and trying to explore lots of different areas of literature. So the way this challenge is structured is there's 25 prompts, laid out like a bingo card. It's sort of a misnomer because there's no like bingo type. You don't get it thin lines or any of that. You just you do each of the 25 prompts, a book for each of the 25 prompts over the course of a year. While the parameters are fairly broad for what can count in toward these prompts, it is for the fantasy subreddit. So the way they describe the rules is it has to have everything that you read has to have some sort of speculative element to it. So it has to fall under the broad heading of speculative fiction. So that means fantasy, sci-fi, supernatural horror, dystopian stuff. Magical realism, I guess, also is included in this. Anything that has a speculative element to it. So it's a pretty big pool to select from. In addition to meeting the requirements of the basic prompts for each of these 25 bingo squares, there's also like a hard mode for each square, which is like a more specific requirement, and that's kind of cool too. I don't go out of my way to do those. Mostly because I don't want to like limit myself that much. It's not really part of why I'm doing this. But yeah, people will go out of their way to do hard modes. A lot of people get really into this and do like multiple cards a year. Like I saw someone did like 6 last year. It's so crazy. A couple other important rules: you can swap out one square for a previous year's square, which I've already done. And you can have one of your books be a reread, but no more than one. The books must all be at least novella length, and you can't use the same author more than once. Barring short story collections and that kind of thing, you can't read 2 novels by the same author or something like that. So yes, it's very fun. And what I'm going to do today is talk to you about the squares for this year's Our Fantasy Bingo Challenge. First, going to talk about the squares that I've actually completed already. Then I'm going to talk about the squares that I haven't yet completed, and I'm going to talk about some of the books that I'm thinking about reading for these challenges. This is very, nerdy, and I love it, and I hope you enjoy this video. So the first square that I'm going to talk about that is one that I've already completed is called Impossible Places. Read a book set in a location that would break a physicist. The geometry, non-Euclidean. The volume, bigger on the inside. The directions, merely a suggestion. And hard mode for that is at least 50% of the book takes place within the impossible place. So for this, I read Dark Matter by Bill Crouch. I talked about it in my top 10 books of the year so far list. I believe I put it at number 9. This is a fun sci-fi thriller that involves quantum physics and multiple realities. At this point, I'm going to talk about this book's applicability to the square. So here's a little bit of a spoiler warning for that. In this book, the main character has a alternate version of himself in an alternate reality who creates a way to traverse realities in order to reach this version of himself, his reality. And he creates this box that, in combination with a drug that you have to take to suppress a certain part of your brain, allows you to traverse realities. And in this box, in the kind of endless corridor that it becomes when you're under the influence of this drug, is the impossible place in question. It does not meet heart mode. It's not 50% of the book taking place in this. But yeah, good book, fun sci-fi thriller, worth checking out. And that is my pick for Impossible Places. The next category is a book in parts. read a book that is separated into large sections within the main text. This includes things like acts, parts, days, years, and so on, but has to be more than just chapter breaks. And hard mode for that is the book has 4 or more parts. So tentatively for that, I have Tender as the Flesh, which I reviewed recently on the channel. This book is actually split into 2 parts for some reason. I don't really understand why, other than there's like somewhat of a time break between the 2 parts. But it didn't super feel necessary to me to be split into parts. But so I mean, I might, if I find a better spot for this on the list, I might swap something else out for this category. And that's the thing about that I didn't mention earlier about this is that, none of this is set in stone yet in terms of like which books are going to apply to which squares. These are just the ones that I'm pretty set on currently, but it definitely could change. But yeah, for now, Tender as the Flesh just takes place in 2 parts, and I figured that would be a good one to use for this square. The next square that I've already completed is Last in a Series. Read the final entry in a series. Pretty straightforward. And hard mode is the series is 4 or more books long. And that is Last Argument of Kings, the 3rd book in the First Law trilogy, and the bigger First Law world by Joe Abercrombie. This book really did save Joe Abercrombie for me as someone who I want to return to, both because I thought it was a pretty good ending to a rocky, first couple books, and also that it involved a pretty substantial, world-building choice that I really liked and that made me want to continue revisiting the First Law world, just to see, how it plays out more into the future. So that is my pick for Last in a Series. It's not hard mode. It's only 3 books. So I'm 0 for 3, I think. Yeah, Tender as the Flesh wasn't hard mode either. So I'm 0 for 3 for hard mode so far. So the next square that I've completed already is Book Club or Read-Along book. And this is read a book that was or is officially a group read on our fantasy. And then there's a bunch of stuff about specifics that I won't get into. But hard mode, read and participate in our fantasy book club or read along during the bingo year. So the book that I've read for this is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, her classic work of fantasy. This is somewhat of a YA associated book. I don't know if I would actually super call it that, but it definitely can be read by kids, younger adults, whatever. I did like this. It's a bit slow. It's a bit, even though these were the first, appearance of some of these fantasy tropes like a magic school and that kind of thing, it felt like, fairly well-trod territory for what I've read. But Le Guin's writing is great. I love her prose. And she really manages to sell the themes. I read The Left Hand of Darkness, one of her sci-fi books, and this so far from her, and in both of them, they both kind of sell the themes really well, and I appreciated them both for that, even if I didn't love either of them. Also, just as an aside, I love this cover. All the older books I have such killer covers, and I'm starting to realize more and more that I'm not a fan of modern stuff nearly as much in terms of cover art decisions. And the next category that I've already completed is Epistolary. The book must prominently feature any of the following: diary or journal entries, letters, messages, newspaper clippings, transcripts, etc. And hard mode is the book is told entirely in epistolary format. So this book that I have is not told entirely in epistolary format, but half of it is. This is also my favorite book of the year so far, and I talked about it quite a bit already in the channel, but I'll talk about it more, and that's The Troop by Nick Cutter, a horror novel that absolutely blew me away, is currently my favorite book of the year, though it might be unseated by the book I'm currently reading, which I'll talk about at some point, I'm sure. The way this book is structured is you'll get a couple chapters of the narrative, and then you'll get a transcript of an interview or a newspaper article and stuff like that. And it really adds to the foreboding because there a lot of these newspapers and interviews and stuff are referencing the events that are taking place in the narrative, and that just really ramps up the tension because you're oh, this is going to blow up into something big, and you're waiting to see how that happens and what it becomes. But yeah, if I didn't sell you enough on it on previous videos, or if you haven't watched previous videos, this book is fantastic, very dark and heavy and disturbing, but incredible. I love Nick Cutter. Gonna read more of his books for sure. And yeah, that's what I got for Epistolary. So then the next square that I've completed tentatively is 5 SFF short stories, and this is just like, I guess, any 5 science fiction fantasy short stories. Hard mode is read an entire SFF anthology or collection. So that's the first hard mode I've got. Congratulations to me. I'm always pretty excited about short story squares in this because I'm a big fan of short stories. I think they're underrepresented in discussions on BookTube and elsewhere. And I actually did discuss this book that I've completed here in 2 videos already on the channel where I ranked all of the short stories in this collection. And that collection is Night Shift by Stephen King, his first short story collection. So this is a really solid collection. Less horror than I would have liked, maybe. More thrillery, a lot more like thrillery type stuff, but there was some great horror. And a lot of the non-horror, or not a lot, but some of the non-horror stuff was really solid too. Yeah, this had some really great stories like Jerusalem's Lot, Children of the Corn, and Quitters Inc. Those were all really killer. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to stick with this for this square, mostly because it's like pretty restricting, both in that I plan on reading more short story collections this year, and also now that I've done this, I can't use Stephen King for any other square because you can't use an author more than once. But for now, this is what I've got locked in for this square. And the last one that I've actually completed so far is Recycle a Bingo Square. Use a square from a previous year as long as it does not repeat one on the current card, as in you can't have 2 book club squares. Hard mode is not very clever of us, but do the hard mode for the original square. The square I chose was from last year's, and that was Space Opera. And I chose this because I really wanted to read Leviathan Wakes, the first book in the Expanse series, which I loved, and I've already read the second one and plan on reading the rest. But yeah, it's a space opera, so it obviously applies to the square. And I don't remember what the hard mode was, sorry. But it's probably not a hard mode. The square is interesting, and I had to clarify because I wasn't sure how this works. But you already, like I said earlier, you already have the ability to swap out one of the squares. But this is in addition to that, so you actually can swap out 2 squares this year. And I already know the square that I'm going to be swapping out because I don't like it, and I'll mention that when we get to it. But yeah, Leviathan Wakes was my pick for this Recycle a Bingo Square. All right, now that we have the already tentatively completed squares out of the way, I'm going to get to the squares I haven't completed and talk to you about some of the ideas that I have for these squares and what I might read for them. The first one is Knights and Paladins. One of the protagonists is a paladin or knight. Pretty straightforward. Hard mode is the character has an oath or promise to keep. So for this one, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be doing this guy, Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive, his, big epic, one of his big epic fantasy series. It's obviously a huge book if you know Sanderson, and if you know this series, all of these books are very, very long. They're like 1,200 pages. Let's see. This guy is, 1,250 something pages. I like Sanderson. I like this series. It's not my favorite thing in the world, and it's very much focused on, as a lot of his work is, on magic systems, which are really cool and well developed, but it's not, the thing I love the most that will get me in the door when it comes to fantasy. It's also like I'm not a huge fan of his prose. It's just very conversational and simple. A lot of people love that about his writing, but I don't. I really come to books for hearing some really nice language that I don't normally hear in everyday life, and that isn't really what you get with him. Again, not just me, but yeah, I would definitely recommend this series if you like Sanderson's kind of sophisticated magic systems, and the world building in this is really cool. So while I'm probably going to read the Rhythm of War for that, I have some other options that I'm interested in. I would like to read Empire of Silence, the first book in the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio, The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman, and The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell. These are all ones that I've heard great things about, and all involve knights and paladins and stuff. So those are things I'm thinking about as well. The next square is Hidden Gem, a book with under 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. New releases and ARCs from popular authors do not count. Follow the spirit of the square. Hard mode is published more than 5 years ago. So I have a book that I picked up kind of on a whim that I think I might use for this, and that's this. It's called Cthulhu Armageddon by C.T. Phipps. Yeah, I think this has like 500 or something reviews on Goodreads. Yeah, I don't really know much about it, but it's a post-apocalyptic Western, and I love Cthulhu stuff. I love the Lovecraft mythos, and this seems like a very fun application of that stuff. An apocalypse where the old gods won and where Cthulhu is, at taking over the world or something. I don't know what this is about, but that seems like the vibe from looking at this. I haven't really read any descriptions of what this is about or anything like that. But yeah, it looks like a lot of fun. So other options that I have for that square are 2 books by Michael Shea, who is a Lovecraftian horror writer that I have read a couple of his stories in other collections and would very much like to read more, because I really enjoyed one of his stories in particular called Fat Face is so good and was like my favorite in a Lovecraftian horror collection that I read a couple years ago. But yeah, Michael Shea wrote a couple novels, one of which is Color Out of Time, which is, I guess, a sequel to Color Out of Space. The other one that I was thinking about from Shea is Demiurge, which is the collection of his short fiction, of his mythos-oriented short fiction. So yeah, those are both options for that square as well for me. Next square is Published in the 80s. Read a book that was first published anytime between 1980 and 1989. Hard mode, written by an author of color. I have a bunch of options for this, and one of them is Neuromancer by William Gibson, the classic work of cyberpunk fiction from '84. This also fits a couple other potential categories, so I might just reserve this for something else. But that's an option. Slugs by Sean Hudson. This is a classic horror novel from the '80s. And look at that cover. It's so good. It's so nightmarish and also kind of ridiculous. And I just love 80s and 90s horror covers. They gorged themselves on living flesh, feasted on rich human blood. Yeah, that's good shit. Yeah, this is about, a killer slug attack taking over the world or something. I don't know exactly, but it looks a ton of fun. And I know Sean Hudson is known as like a sort of crazy, trashy horror author from the 80s. So I'm looking forward to checking this out, even if I don't choose it for the square. Another option is The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. I've seen the play of this and the movie based on it, and I like them both. Ghost stories aren't usually my favorite thing in the world, so I really liked that. I appreciated these so much because it's a somewhat of a rarity, and so I definitely do want to check out this book at some point. Another one is The Hungry Moon by Ramsey Campbell, 80s horror, Lovecraftian horror novel. Yeah, Ramsey Campbell's a big name in that world, and I've liked the short stories that I've read from him and would really like to get a novel under my belt from him. One other option that I have that I don't have a physical copy of yet, is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker, the book that Hellraiser is based on. Big Hellraiser fan. So I would love to read the novella that it is based on. For last year's book bingo, I actually read one of his Books of Blood Volume 2 by him for one of the squares, and I loved it. I was like surprised how much I loved it. It's great stuff, and I'm absolutely going to be reading more from him. And so Hellbound Heart might be a good pick for the 80s square. Next square is High Fashion. Read a book where clothing/fashion or fiber arts are important to the plot. This can be a crafty main character or a setting where fashion itself is explored. Hard mode, the main character makes clothes or fibers. This one's kind of a tricky one for me. I don't really know much that will slot into this category. One of the things that I wanted to say at the top of the video that I forgot and am now just going to say to you is, with some of these squares, I would love to see some of your suggestions for books that would apply to these squares, and recommendations for me for these categories in particular. I'm looking to hear your suggestions for anything, but for these squares in particular, I would love some recommendations. And this is one of those. So I have two options that I am already interested in reading and that seemingly apply to this square. The first of those is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is a French book that was written, I believe, originally in 1995, and then only translated into English, in the last 10 years or something like that. I have no idea how this applies to the square, but I've seen people suggest it for this square, and I've heard great things about this book, and would like to read it quite a bit. So that's an option. Another option that I have is Margaret Atwood's classic dystopian work, The Handmaid's Tale, about a world where women are basically become subservient to men again. And I think that the way this applies to the square is that the women in this world wear these very, concealing and distinctive red cloaks and white head bonnets that kind of cover their hair and most of their face. So that that's a classic, and I would love to read at some point. So that this might be a good opportunity for that. Next square that I'm looking at here is Down with the System. Read a book in which a main plot revolves around disrupting a system, and hard mode for that is not a governmental system. I have one main candidate for this and a couple minor candidates for this. I have a physical copy of the main candidate for this. I don't know where it is at the moment, but that guy is Foundation by Isaac Asimov, the classic work of sci-fi from one of the masters of classic sci-fi, Isaac Asimov. I've never read any of his stuff, so I'm probably going to do that for this category. But I also have looked at The Reformatory by Tanner Dew, a modern horror novel, and also Dungeon Crawler Carl. This seems to be suggested for everything and is an insanely popular book right now. Probably the biggest lit RPG book in existence. Lit RPG is a genre that involves a lot of the elements of video game RPGs, actual levels and stats and then that kind of thing. And I'm curious to sort of dive into that genre. Next square is Gods and Pantheons. Read a book featuring divine beings. Hard mode, there are multiple pantheons involved. So the big candidate that I have for this one is Gardens of the Moon by Steve Erickson, the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I definitely do want to dive into this series, and this might be a good opportunity, but I also have a bunch of other series that I'm in the middle of, and this one this series is kind of a challenge from what I gather, and there's a lot to it. So I might hold off on this one. Another one of the options that I have, which I don't own, but I would absolutely love to own, is The Grace of Kings, the first book in Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty. Next square is one that I have pretty much picked out, and that the square is Parent Protagonist. Read a book where a main character has a child to care for. The child does not have to biologically be related to the character. And then hard mode is the child is also a major character in the story. And for that, I've been wanting to read this book for quite a while now, and I pretty much am definitely going to read this probably in the next couple months. And that's Hyperion by Dan Simmons, classic sci-fi novel from 1990, I believe, about several pilgrims' journey to this planet of Hyperion. From what I gather, this book is something of a collection of short stories in that you have this group of pilgrims who's traveling to Hyperion, and a lot of the book is you are hearing the backstories of these pilgrims, and one of them is a parent, from what I gather. So that's the way in which this will apply to that square. I'm almost certainly going to be reading this for this square, but one other option that I had is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Have yet to read any Cormac McCarthy, and I have a copy of Blood Meridian, but I've heard people rave about The Road, and people rave about all of his books, but more unanimously, I think, than with Blood Meridian. People kind of rave about the road, and I've seen the movie and I liked it. So I might use that as a backup if I, for some reason, don't choose Hyperion for the square. The next square is published in 2025. A book published for the first time in 2025. Hard mode. It's also a debut novel, as in its author's first published novel. I have a few options here. One is The End of the World as We Know It, the collection of short stories set in the world of Stephen King's The Stand that's coming out here in a couple months. I would like to read this, but it's also like 800 pages long from what I gather, and I don't know if I want to. I'm currently reading like a 1,000-page book right now, and if I'm reading Rhythm of War, that's another one. I don't know if I want to slot in another big chunky guy for the rest of the year. Maybe. One other option I have is The Unworthy by Agustina Bastarrica, who wrote Tender as the Flesh. But that would also mean that I would need to remove Tender as the Flesh, because again, can only use one from an author. So that's probably not the choice for me. The other one I really do want to read a lot, and I might read very soon, is Shroud by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I love Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I'm looking forward to reading more from him. But I also have another one of his books actually slotted for another one of these categories, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. So none of the three of these are like ideal for me, and I'm not someone who keeps up a ton with new books. So definitely for this category, if you have any recommendations for new speculative fiction books from this year, please let me know. I would love to hear what you've got. Next square is Author of Color. Read a book written by a person of color. Hard mode, read a horror novel by an author of color. So I have a couple candidates for this, and I have a hard mode candidate for this, and I think that's the one I'm going to choose, most likely. And that book is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones is a Native American man who has become a very prominent and well-respected horror author in recent years. He's written a bunch of books. And I've yet to read any of them, but this is known as one of his, big ones. Another option I have for this square is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is a sci-fi story about a black woman who travels back in time from modern day to slave times. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to checking out some Octavia E. Butler at some point. She's one of those big names in sci-fi and fantasy from the last 50 years, and people seem to love her stuff, so this definitely could be a good opportunity for me to dive into the world of Butler. So the next square is small press or self-published. Read a book published by a small press, not one of the big five publishing houses or Bloomsbury, or self-published. Hard mode is the book has under 100 ratings on Goodreads or written by a marginalized author. So I'm pretty set on the one I'm going to use for this category, and that is this. Your Body is Not Your Body. It's a collection of trans-focused horror short stories put out by Tenebrous Press, which is a small horror-oriented publishing company that I have seen around, and they seem to make a lot of cool stuff. So pretty sure that this is going to be my choice for that, and also pretty sure that it meets hard mode. Last time I checked, it didn't have over 100 Goodreads reviews, so not that I care, as you can tell, but just, for the sake of talking about it. The next square is Biopunk. Read a book that focuses on biotechnology and or its consequences. Hard mode, there is no electricity-based technology. So I really, really, really want to use Children of Ruin by Adrian Tchaikovsky, the sequel to Children of Time, for this. I guess I'll spoil Children of Time a little bit by talking about in the way that it is applicable to this square, and that is that in preparation for colonizing other planets in the universe, a genetic virus of sorts is introduced onto planets that are suitable for human life, and which is designed to basically force evolution on a planet so that it will be habitable for human beings. This has an unintended consequence of creating a race of hyper-evolved intelligent spiders on one of these planets. And from what I gather, this kind of trend continues in this one with more like evolved, enhanced sea creature life, squids and whatnot. I am absolutely going to be reading this soon, but whether or not I'm going to use it for this square is sort of a question, because as I said earlier, I might want to use Tchaikovsky's new book for the written in 2025 square. One other option that I have is Born by Jeff Vandermeer. I'm not sure. I don't know really what this is about, and I'm not sure how it necessarily applies to the square, but people have recommended it for this square. I've said in a couple previous videos that I was really disappointed by the Southern Reach trilogy. I liked Annihilation well enough, and I love the Annihilation movie, but the follow-up 2 books in the trilogy were boring to me, and I didn't love them. But I really do want to give Jeff Vandermeer more chances, and so I might do this guy for that square, and to really kind of figure out if he's really just not for me. There is something about his sensibilities that is really appealing, and which I identify with, but I haven't really liked the execution of anything that I've read from him, but it is really just the Southern Reach trilogy that I've read. So I'm open and hoping that I will have my mind changed about Jeff Vandermeer. So that's an option for this square. Also, I might just read Jurassic Park for this square. That is certainly a book that involves biotechnology and its consequences. And I have heard that the book is more horror oriented, and that certainly sounds appealing to me. I grew up in the 90s. Of course, I love Jurassic Park. Everyone loves Jurassic Park, especially in my age range. So this next square, I didn't include under the completed ones. I probably should have, but because I'm almost done with this book, but I'll just mention it here. The next square is Elves and or Dwarves. Read a book that features the classic fantasy archetypes of elves and or dwarves. They do not have to fit the classical tropes, but they must be either named as elves and or dwarves or easily recognized as such. Hard mode, the main character is an elf or a dwarf. So last year there was this category, orcs, goblins, trolls, similar kind of category where it's just like book features orcs, goblins, or trolls. And I chose Fellowship of the Ring for that, and that was my reread for the year. For this one, I chose The Two Towers, and that is also a reread for me. One, I just want to reread The Lord of the Rings. It's been like 20 years since I've read them. But also, I'm not that interested in the classic fantasy tropes that much. They're well-trod territory for me in D&D and in other media, and it's just not super interesting to me. I'm absolutely willing to take any suggestions in regards to interesting takes on this. I know that there are some out there, but it's just not the top of the list for the kinds of things I'm going out of my way to read. So I figured for this I would just continue my rereading Lord of the Rings, and I'm almost done with Two Towers, so this one is actually pretty much completed. Next square is LGBTQIA Protagonist. Read a book where the main character is under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella. Hard mode, the character is marginalized on at least one additional access, such as being a person of color, disabled, or a member of an ethnic, religious, cultural minority in the story, etc. I have a couple options in mind for this. The first is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This is about a gay couple and their daughter who are vacationing on this like cabin, and they're visited by a group of people who take them hostage and tell them that one of the fathers must sacrifice the other to prevent the world from ending. I've seen the adaptation of this, Knock at the Cabin Door, I believe it's called, and it was pretty good. I've never read anything from Paul Tremblay, and he's another big name in modern horror that I want to check out for sure. And this might be a good option for that. Another option that I have is one of Chuck Tingle's books, either Camp Damascus or Bury Your Gaze. Chuck Tingle is known as originally sort of a sort of satirical erotic fiction writer. That's what I knew him as, but in the past couple of years he's come to prominence as a serious horror writer. Definitely want to check out his works. Next category is Stranger in a Strange Land. Read a book where it deals with being a foreigner in a new culture. The character or characters, if they're a group, must be either visiting or moving in as a minority. Hard mode, the main character is an immigrant or refugee. So for this, there's several options. Kindred is is one of them I might use. Also, N.K. Jemison's fifth season, the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy, it apparently fits this as well. But I really think I'm just going to read the book that the category is named after and read Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert A. Heinlein. This is a classic of sci-fi. I believe this is about a man raised on Mars who then comes back to Earth at some point and has to sort of navigate being a person in a world where, you know, there are social conventions and laws and expectations where he hadn't known them before, just being, you know, living on Mars. As with Foundation, I'm looking to check out some of these big classics of sci-fi. So I'm pretty set on using this one for Stranger in a Strange Land. All right, there's only a few left. The next one is Cozy SFF, and it says, Cozy is up to your preferences for what you find comforting. The genre typically features relatable characters, low stakes, minimal conflict, and a happy ending. Hard mode, the author is new to you. I'm pretty sure what I'm going to do for this one. Cozy is not, you know, necessarily something I go out of my way for when I pick something to read, although that is changing a little bit. I would probably call these Tales from the City books that I've been reading cozy to a degree. But yeah, it's definitely not something I go out of my way for. But to me, this fits that category. This is Men at Arms by Terry Pratchett. If you know anything about Terry Pratchett, you know that his work mainly takes place in his fantasy world called Discworld. And this is the second book in one of the series that takes place in Discworld. That started with Guards, which I read last year and which I loved. Very funny, very charming, and very, you know, cozy. Not you know, it's mostly it's supposed to be fun and funny, and not, you know, serious, heavy subject matter. His sense of humor works really well. It gets compared to Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that kind of thing, and I can see some similarities from what I know of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Maybe, you know, when I need to rebound from something very heavy, I'll come and read this guy. But yeah, so that's pretty much settled. That's what I'm going to do for Cozy SFF. The next category is one I think is pretty funny. It's generic title. And read a book that has one or more of the following words in the title: blood, bone, broken, court, dark, shadow, song, sword, or throne. And they can be pluralized. Hard mode, the title contains more than one of the listed words, or contains at least one word and a color, number, or animal, real or mythical. Yeah, that's pretty funny because, you know, with a lot of these romantasy books that are around these days, the titles are starting to look kind of generic and repetitive. I read that Court of Thorns and Roses book earlier this year, and it does seem like a lot of writers are following in those tracks of using those kinds of titles. So I have two options for this guy, and both of them are kind of appealing, and I'm still kind of juggling what I'm going to do in that regard. So the first one is either Shadowing Claw, which is the first two books in Gene Wolfe's 4-book Book of the New Sun. Those two books are Shadow of the Torturer and Claw of the Conciliator, I believe. Shadow of the Torturer, Claw of the Conciliator. So I could just read Shadow of the Torturer. This book contains both of those, but if I wanted to, I could just read Shadow of the Torturer, and that would, you know, fulfill this requirement because it's Shadow. But I might just read this whole thing. It's not crazy long, and I don't like leaving, you know, half books unread too much. But yeah, this is a classic of science fantasy, I guess. It's got both sci-fi and fantasy elements. It is challenging from what I gather because the language is pretty strange, but that sounds intriguing to me, certainly. I also have The Shadow of What Was Lost, the first book in the Lycanius trilogy, which is a high fantasy series. Don't know much about this, but my mother-in-law gifted me this whole trilogy a few years ago, and I have yet to get around to reading them, and so I'm feeling kind of bad about that, and might want to use this opportunity to read this book. So we'll see. The next square is the one that I'm going to be swapping out for sure, and I get that they're trying something with this, but I'm not big on this, and it's not a book. Do something new besides reading a book. Watch a TV show, play a game, learn to summon a demon. Okay, maybe not that one. Spend time with fantasy, science fiction, or horror in another format: movies, video games, TTRPGs, board games, etc. Hard mode is write and post a review to our fantasy. Yeah, I get that they're trying to do something cool and different with this square, but I do all that stuff anyway, and this is a separate project for me that is a reading focused project, and I'm not interested in doing this, so I'm definitely going to be swapping this square out for something. I'm not sure yet what that will be, but I'll let you know if I do an update to this video at some point. I'll let you know what I choose for that square. And the last square, number 25, is Pirates. Read a book where characters engage in piracy. Hard mode, not a seafaring pirate. So I really have only one option for this, and it's Neuromancer. And I guess I'm presuming this involves some kind of technological piracy or something. I don't know the specific way in which piracy applies to Neuromancer, and I don't try and spoil things for myself, so I'm not trying to figure it out too hard. So yeah, this might be the best choice because like I said, I don't really know anything else. But yeah, again, if you have any suggestions for pirates or for any of these other categories, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear them. And this is the end of this video. I am really looking forward to diving deeper into this project and to hopefully reading some amazing books as a result of it. Thank you for visiting the Rybrary. Let me know what you thought of this video, and have a good day.